I'm very well. In Scotland here, and the weather is getting slightly better. Spring must be on its way.
Great. I have a very interesting topic to discuss with you today, but before we jump into it, I actually want to ask you a couple of questions. If someone has never actually heard about us before, what are we trying to do with this podcast?
Right. We're trying to do several things. The first is to enable people who are perhaps new into careers, new into jobs, to find a source of wisdom on the one hand, and certainly practice skills, things that they can do to help ease them into the working world, particularly the working world of new relationships where perhaps somebody has more power than you have, or relationships where there's cultural differences, and enabling you to make relationships with those people that work for you and work for them. Take the hassle out of everyday workaday life, I think. The second thing we're trying to do here, or dare I say we are going to do, is to help people to think critically about what's going on around them, to question themselves, the world that they live in, and other people and what they're doing and how best to respond to them in the world. I think that's it in a nutshell.
You know, when you mentioned about the reasons behind our podcast and behind our channel as such, you mentioned something about dealing with different people at work, dealing with different relationships at work. And of course, leadership and management is an inevitable part of it. We're dealing with different people, different supervisors, different managers. And sometimes when we listen to different podcasts, read the academic or read different literature, we feel like a lot of information out there feels either too academic or too simplistic. So why does it feel sometimes this way?
Because it's not written by people who actually do management or do leadership, have any concrete experience in the real world. And that is actually one of the problems we have with management and business education. Very often the practitioners, the academics who or trainers who deliver these courses have either very little or no practical experience, or they had practical experience, maybe a lot of it, but a very long time ago. So they're not current. They become sort of detached and divorced from the reality of everyday work. I think the benefit of listening to us is that both of us are still managing things. We're both still doing stuff in the real world with all its lumps and bumps and difficulties and challenges and delights. So we're current. We're people who are actually doing this for real. And to back that up, we do have the underpinning knowledge. I mean, both of us have master's degrees in our fields, and by the standards of management education, are actually quite well educated.
Well summed up. Given this our experience, given our exposure, what do you think people often misunderstand when it comes to management and leadership?
Well, first of all, they mix the two up. Management and leadership, perhaps I'm rather old-fashioned, but I'm rather partial to a gin and tonic. Both are clear liquids, and to mix a gin and tonic, you put a certain amount of gin in and a certain amount of tonic in, add a bit of ice and lemon, and you have your gin and tonic. Leadership and management is very similar. They both look the same on the face of it, but it's getting the balance right. And too much gin or too little gin, and you don't have a good gin and tonic. Too much leadership or too little management, and you don't have an effective outcome. So it's about getting the balance right, I think.
What is the difference between being a good manager or being a good leader?
That's an excellent question. And of course, as we've just established, management and leadership are two totally different things. But they are performed in the same act, in the same moment. So what's leadership about? Well, leadership, the English language word for leadership goes back to, way back past the old German, to a Norse word, a Viking word, meaning the person who has the trust of the group and can show the way forward to somewhere that's better or safer. And indeed, in modern day Icelandic, which equates really to Old Norse, to the old Viking language, there is still a word today that means precisely that. Management, on the other hand, is a modern, relatively speaking, first started coming to light in the late 1600s. It's a modern European, continental European word that comes from the French for housekeeper, or the head of the household, the steward of the house, and it meant to use sparingly. So there's something in there about using resources well and wisely, because you haven't got an endless supply and you have to make certain that these things are used appropriately on the one hand. And on the other hand, simultaneously at the same time, there was a derivation rooted in the Italian, get this, for a horse trainer or horse breaker. Now, think of a horse as a very large, powerful animal that doesn't necessarily want to do what its human owner or master wants it to do. So you have to train it, you have to break it in. So there's something in there in management about breaking people into conforming to a system. In other words, it's about compliance with an agreed system, an agreed way of doing things. So you can see that the two actually might conflict with each other, and indeed at times they do. The trick of good leadership and management is to know which part of what you're doing at any one given point in time is about leading folk, and which is about, well, getting the trains to run on time, getting things in the right order, making certain that the right goals are being achieved. Not an easy task. And for me, it's like layers of an onion. You know, we go through our management careers. I mean, how long have I been at this? You don't want to know. A very, very long time. You're, relatively speaking, at the beginning of your career. But isn't it like layers of an onion? You know, we have lots of experiences, and we take these experiences and we say, oh, yeah, I really know what leadership and management is about. We peel back a layer of the onion, so to say, oh, my goodness, there's another one below that. Well, I tell you, I don't know how many layers you've been through, but I've been through dozens, and I'm still learning about this craft. And it is a craft, it's an art. And a lot of leadership and management has been hijacked by pseudoscience. It is, largely speaking, in terms of its practice, an art form. Yeah, sure, there's a lot of figures, there's a lot of numbers, there's a lot of stats which support the art form. They aren't what we do, they are what we use to help us do what we do.
This is so interesting. So if you think about leadership or management, it's more of an art rather than something that can be taught. So with this, yep, go ahead.
Yeah, well, that's really interesting. Can it be taught? I think your supposition, your sense that it cannot be taught is to an extent right. However, it can be learned. There's a big difference. So, and this is why a lot of management courses, leadership courses fail, because they send people away to a classroom. So they take them out of the context, and then they sit them down and they give them theory and expect them to go back and turn the theory into practice. Is it any wonder it doesn't work? So it has to, what we do has to be grounded in practice. It has to be grounded in the reality of everyday life. Adults learn best and most through doing stuff, through experience. So we learn through the experience of practicing. And the only way that we can really develop that practice is by getting feedback from other people, the people we lead, the people we manage, our bosses, our peers. So we need information. You know, that's the old cybernetic thing of, you know, we need feedback in order to modify where we're going and how we're going. And by that, it's rather like, you're driving a car and you press the accelerator. The car goes faster. You look at the speedometer and it tells you how fast. And if you take your foot off, you slow down. It's the same mechanism. We need feedback, constant feedback, but we also need to develop a sense of being reflexive, sitting back and thinking about our practice and our experience and what we've done or what we've not done, what's worked, what we could have done differently, from different perspectives, bearing in mind, our take on life and, if you like, our window on life, our worldviews. We see all these things through a particular set of ideas and experiences that we've had previously, and they all affect how we operate in the world. So we need to sit down and think about what's happened in the light of those things so that we can do something different next time to get a different result to improve our practice. A reflexive practice and feedback are essential, and this is where the real learning takes place. It's not in a classroom. It's in there in practice doing stuff. So what I would recommend to any person going into a career where perhaps they're having their first supervisory year, get yourself a mentor and get yourself a coach. What's the difference between a mentor and a coach? Well, a coach, think of an athlete. A coach is somebody who can show you how to perform better. So they've got skills, knowledge, experience, and they can develop your skill, knowledge, and experience with you. A mentor, on the other hand, is slightly different. A mentor is probably 2, 3, possibly 4 rungs up the ladder, grades up the ladder. Obviously a much older person, much more experienced, who helps you develop your sense of self in the role through imbibing wisdom. And also, if you like, covering your back, making sure that you've got the right opportunities coming down the line to develop your practice, because you need a variety of experiences. When somebody says to me, I've got 20 years experience as a manager, well, is that 20 years of different experiences, or is it 1 year 20 times over? So a mentor is somebody who thinks about your career and your long-term development. A coach is somebody who thinks about here and now and what you're doing in your job day to day.
I love the point. I actually have 2 follow-up questions. You mentioned that finding a mentor would be good for managers or leaders to develop their leadership style, their art of leadership. My question would be, is it only related to the leaders, or is it also for any person who is relatively in the beginning of their career? And the second follow-up question is where one can actually find those mentors.
Okay, well, there's several questions in there, and it's a brilliant question because, and this is one of the things that really frustrates me. We talk about leadership and management, so there's somehow sort of special and different. But let's think about it. What happens when you take the team away? What have you got? You haven't got anything, have you? You've got a person who has a role and nobody to perform the role with. So what we need to be doing is talking about leadership and management and followership. So this is where we come into ideas about learning to manage your manager. So if we think about management as getting things done through and with other people, maybe my boss needs a bit of management. Maybe my boss and I have to have an adult conversation about what's to be done, how it's to be done, where it's to be done, to what standard. And maybe there are some constraints. Maybe I can't do these 3 tasks that I've been given. I can only do 2, or I could do 3, but to a lesser quality. So, what do you want? How do you want it? How can I help you, my boss, to help me to do the kind of job that you want me to do? So we need to start talking about a community. And I think some of the terms that we use in business and management aren't actually that helpful. I like terms like community. So a business is a community of people. And within the community, there are kind of like little families, aren't they? You know, a little work group of 4 or 5 or 6 people. So a whole community is made up of a series of these smaller teams or work groups. And, you know, they, of course, are made up of individuals. So we need to be thinking about how we develop individuals to work in the small groups, to work with larger groups, to work with the people who are giving shape, form, and direction, who should be listening to their community to understand how they're getting it right or not for that community so that everybody can get to where they want to get to. So leadership and followership, again, it's a bit like a gin and tonic, isn't it? It's part of the whole complete social entity, social organism. And I think a lot of managers and leaders just think of it as, there's the troops, there are the ordinary workers, and then there's me, the important person. And I did this little thing with particularly boards of senior managers, and you know, just think about this, guys. Who's the most important person in the organization? And we go up and we put on the whiteboard, you know, well, it's the CEO at the top. Okay, so who are the next most important? And they're all sitting at the table, of course. Who are the next most important people? Oh, well, it's the CFO and it's the COO, and then you've got all the barons, if you like. And then, who's important after? Oh, well, it's all the heads of departments, you know, the directors of various departments and so on. And you go on, and you then go on, and at the bottom, there are the troops, you know, the ordinary people. I say, now because some of them still go shopping, you know, when you're checking out at the supermarket, that you're talking to the checkout person, are you thinking about the CEO of the supermarket? No, you're not. The supermarket is the checkout person. So let's turn the organogram upside down. The least important person in the organization to the client, to the end user, to the reason that you exist, is actually the person on the checkout, the ordinary person. And your job is to serve your people so that they can serve their people, so that they in turn can serve the people who serve the client, the customer. That puts the power dynamics in a totally different light. Service is probably the key thing in any organization, but it's a very old-fashioned word and not appreciated now, because we have a culture that's all about me, it's all about making money, it's all about my career, it's all about anything but the collective good that we can all do and make some money and have some fun and do some good stuff in the world.
I really love your analogy about gin and tonic, and then we cannot really go anywhere without the followers, so to say. So leaders are needed and followers are equally needed. So let's concentrate on that. I'm just trying to think about someone who is relatively the beginning or the mid-career journey, and they are learning to work with different people, with different kind of leaders. What kind of advice would you tell them? Where would they start, so to say?
Well, I suppose this starts with communication. One of those weasel words, which means, you know, so many different things to so many different people. So let's tie it down a little bit. I mean, communication is a two-way street. It's about receiving information from what's out there and giving information, sending it back to other people so that they know where you're coming from. So the point of departure has always got to be gathering information. Remember that feedback loop, the cybernetic feedback loop? So I need to, if you like, watch my speedometer, work out what's going on around me. So what's the relationship between the speed on the speedometer and what's going on outside the car? So it's about gathering information, first of all. And I think, you know, that there's a truth in the fact that we've got one mouth and two ears. Maybe, you know, we ought to use them in that proportion or even less, you know. I think there's far more power to be had in being considered and thinking and watching what's going on before responding. I mean, you wouldn't think, oh, well, I need to just get to where I'm going to go faster. Oh, I'll just hit the accelerator. So you hit oh, goodness me, didn't look out of the windscreen, didn't look at the speedometer. Oh boy, am I now in trouble. And this is what happens with folk. We feel, because in certain cultures, particularly Anglo-Saxon cultures, we've got to be out there, we've got to be making an impact, and we've got to be blah-de-blah-de-blah. Actually, you get further by saying a lot less to start with. And then when you do have to say something, it's considered, it's grounded in what's going on, and it's got more power behind it. So the first thing is gather information, understand what's going on. Second thought is, there's a truism, isn't there? Apparently in out there in the world that do to other people as you would be done unto. Actually, that's not the case, is it? It's actually the other way round. Treat other people the way they would like to be treated. So again, unless you sat and thought about it and watched and understood how they'd like to be treated, you don't know how to treat them. So gather information and treat people the way they would like to be treated, which isn't necessarily the way you would like to be treated. The next thought is that, here we are having a conversation, and I'm saying things to you and you're saying things to me. So we both have some kind of thought that we need to get over. So we say something, and it has an impact. But maybe our intended impact isn't quite the way it comes across, which is the root of misunderstanding. So we've got an intention, we've got an action that comes with the intention, and we've got an impact. And unless those three things are aligned, you get miscommunication. Often misunderstandings simply arise out of a misappreciation of how what you said or what you've done has landed or not landed. And again, this is why we need feedback. Because if nobody says, actually, Stephen, you know what you need to do is just tone it down a bit, or have you considered that word in this culture means, it's stronger than it does in your culture? Oh, right, okay. So I've learned something. Don't go down that road again. Do something different. So communication is also about empathy. And this is a really interesting thing. It's about, the say, travel a mile in somebody else's shoes. Just appreciate what the world is like from their point of view. Listening to an article on the radio the other day, and it was a police hostage negotiator being interviewed about her work. And she said that when she started this work, she thought she was a great communicator, went on her 2-week course and discovered that actually she was a very poor communicator because she didn't start from the point of view of the other person. She always started from the point of view of what she wanted, what she needed to get done. And I see this in managers. I need to get this job done by when. So it's all about the task, and you'll pin your ears back and you'll listen, rather than saying, we've got this job to do. How do you feel that it will go? What do you need? How do you need it? Oh, right, I didn't realize you've got 3 other things on as well. Maybe. And that makes you feel really stressed. Okay, so I'm walking a mile in your shoes. I'm appreciating that by putting this onto you, I'm actually going to put you under stress. What I know about people under stress is that they don't perform terribly well. Something will break in the end. Right, maybe we need to negotiate what's appropriate and what's not appropriate in that. Empathy really very, very important. Good communicators are people who can get inside the feelings and the experience of the other person first before wishing to be understood and to get things done the way they'd like to get it done. It's a kinder way of living as well, if you think about it. And boy, could we do with a bit more kindness in the world.
You know, you've mentioned among other things, you mentioned two very important points. The first one is about gathering information. And then the second one is about trying to understand another person's worldview and about kind of walking the mile in the other person's shoes. I understand that. I think having some certain level of experience, it's much easier to look at, for instance, for people who are just relatively early in their journey, because we already walked those shoes, so we can relate to this. But then the other way around, I think it might be a bit more difficult. Like if I'm a person who just starting career, I simply don't have those tools and I don't have this experience yet to fully understand what my manager is going through. So when you say gather information, I fully on board. But how you, as someone who is relatively in the beginning of careers, or if you're like a manager, but you're talking with someone who has even more years of experience, how you could actually understand their shoes better?
Oh, these are such good questions. There isn't an easy answer. I think the point of departure has got to be going in with your eyes open, realizing that it's a bit like traveling a strange land. I mean, think of yourself going off on holiday to somewhere that you've never been before, a culture that's slightly different. Well, what do? I mean, surely, first of all, you have to be curious. So how the heck does this strange world that I've found myself in, this strange, exciting world, new sounds, new smells, new and totally new feel about it, how does it work? So you start off with observing how it works. And very quickly, you'll find that there are one or two people who kind of resonate with you. They're kind of on your frequency. Maybe they've been around a little bit more than you have. And the way to start to understand the organization is to ask about stories. I mean, as a consultant, it's one of the diagnostic tools I use. Okay, so tell me a story. Tell me a time about when such and such happened, or I've heard tell that this particular incident took place. Can you tell me more about that? A story. And in the stories, you find out how people, if you like, what the accepted behaviors are, what the accepted responses are, what the accepted values, attitudes, beliefs are that underpin that behavior. So that you can start to sort of ease yourself in. One of the things that irritates a lot of people in interesting places that I've traveled in is that when people come from outside, they bring their own assumptions and their own maybe dress codes and their own habits with them and expect everybody else to adapt to the visitor rather than the other way around. If we're going to travel in a strange land, we have to adopt the customs and the habits of the people inside, which of course begs some questions about, particularly when you're in your 20s and you're finding your feet, does this new way, does it fit? Do I feel comfortable in my skin? Is this who I want to be? Is this how I want to be? What we find, very early on, there's, the first job that you get, and job market being what it is, it's not often that we get the job we really want, but we get a job, and then we get a slightly better job, and then we get the job that we really want, and we kind of work towards that late 20s into our 30s. So, but the first couple of jobs that we get that aren't perfect are the places where we can stretch our wings, find out who we are, what floats our boat, what kind of people we want to work with, what kind of ethos we want to work with. And again, Nobody can tell you this. You've got to go and find it out for yourself. Just like traveling, you can read a good travel guide, a good travel book, but it's not the same as actually visiting the place itself, is it?
You know, it sounds to me that what would be a very helpful tool is the art of asking questions, the art of asking right questions. I think this also touches upon what you mentioned about critical thinking and further developing it. Any advice from your side, where one can start, so to say?
Well, asking questions. So it's the old favourites, isn't it? Kipling's old favourites. Who, what, why, when, where, and how. So questions beginning with, oh, tell me, how does that work? Oh, that's interesting. Where do you do that? Open-ended questions that get people to quite literally open up themselves, and be a master of question asking, which actually can do one of two things. Either irritates the hell out of people, because, just shut up and get on with it and do what you're told. You're not going to get very far with that. So, okay, you've tried it and you know that that's possibly not an avenue that you want to push too far, because you really don't want to irritate people. On the other hand, somebody who is open to questions very often values those questions. And if you ask the questions, shows you're interested. So they will put time and effort into helping you move forward. The curious person who asks questions is what a lot of employers, a lot of bosses are looking for. So develop the art of asking questions, and we'll do another piece later in the future where we look at questioning and how that works in more detail. But it starts with a curious mind. I wonder what's going on over there. Right, here are some open-ended questions. Let's get these guys talking about it. Oh, telling me the stories. That's interesting. That's fascinating. Oh, I wouldn't want to do that myself. Isn't that interesting, though? There you go.
It sounds to me that apart from asking the questions, there should be a bit more to this. There should be some initial rapport. There should be good relationship established. Am I being right into this direction of travel, or is there something more to it?
Yeah, well, this is about treating people as they would wish to be treated. You have to build the relationship. So there's a kind of I often describe it when I'm working with folks as a pyramid. The basic foundation of relationships has got to be understanding. If I don't understand the other person and they don't understand me, fundamental getting to grips with what does this person value, what does this person want to achieve, what's been this person's previous experiences. I need some depth if I'm going to build the relationship. Once we've got some understanding, we can then draw a judgment on mutual respect, mutual positive regard. Now, this does not mean I have to agree with them. On the contrary, a lot of what they might be saying or doing, I don't necessarily agree with, but I can see where they're coming from. So I can treat them as, and this is a really important point, I can treat them as a moral equal. Now, I've met people in my time who, in terms of social status, are way up there, people top of government, top of the military, and they've treated me, a very junior person at the time, who was, not their social or their hierarchical equal at all in any way, shape or form. But they treated me as a moral equal. In other words, they had a right to exist, I had a right to exist, we both had a role, and we both knew how our roles fitted in, and we both valued our roles for what they were and how they supported we supported each other in what we were doing. So understanding, mutual respect, mutual positive regard, moral equal. And the next layer is once you have that, you can start to trust people. So what's trust? Trust is a kind of line in the sand over which I'm not prepared to invest or to allow things to happen because I'm not prepared or I'm unable to cope with the consequences. And this is a fundamentally important understanding. Because very often people will say, oh, that Alex, oh, don't trust Alex, dreadful person. Oh, well, really? No, maybe not. Maybe Alex can only be trusted. In other words, I can only allow her to do certain things up to a certain point, after which I can't cope with the consequences, or I haven't got the time and the resources to do so. So it's not about whether or not I trust Alex. Alex is fine. It's about, absolutely, Alex is fine. No, it's about how far I trust myself to be able to deal with the consequences. So saying I don't trust somebody is not taking responsibility for your limitations. It's not about their limitations, it's about your limitation. And you can apply that to a piece of equipment. And you can apply it to a relationship. So, understanding, mutual positive regard, mutual respect, trust. Only then can you get collaboration. And out of collaboration comes performance, and out of performance comes achievement of whatever you want to achieve, success.
Now I'm thinking about more from the manager's perspective and manager's side, so to say. I don't think anyone in this world actually come to their work or the corporate world like really wanted to do something nasty or do something bad.
No, they don't.
Yeah, I think all of us are coming with a good heart and good intentions. And how can one still keep this, so to say, or try to be understanding, keep the mutual positive regards, the mutual respect and trust, even if like the work is super stressful, lots of things going on, different culture upwards as well. How can one keep their ground, and how can one actually build this culture of positive mutual regard, respect and understanding?
Okay, you have no idea how complex a question you just asked. That this is complex and complicated, because nothing happens in a vacuum. The relationships at work are not just pure relationships at work. They happen in a place, in a context. And very often, the system, if you like, the operating system that we find ourselves in, impels us into behaving in a particular way. So the only way to get by is to comply with the system in such a way that it really disappoints other people and gets in the way of them doing a good job. And this is particularly so where you have a lot of bureaucracy. And we can, at some stage, we'll talk about bureaucracy and its benefits and its costs at some other point in time. Suffice to say, there's a lot of bureaucracy around, and it impels people into having to behave and respond in particular ways. So the first thing, as a senior person, you have to ask yourself, what in the way that we're running the show, in terms of the systems, protocols, processes, bureaucracy, can I change in order to make folks' life easier? Now, some of that I won't be able to change because somebody higher up the food chain wants it that way, or indeed there's a governmental regulation which says you've got to do it that way. It's the law. But there are some things we can change. From the point of view of somebody far down at the effect of all this, well, for my money, you've got to understand that there are some things you just can't avoid. So how much of it can you put up with? And this is first, second job, working out, well, actually, I don't want to work in that kind of environment because it just stresses me out, or I just can't do a good job. So you know that you can't flourish in that kind of environment. Some people will turn around and say, well, actually, jobs are hard to come by, and I've just got to put up with what I've got to put up with. I'm sorry, but perhaps on occasions that's the way it is. So what can I do about it? Well, the first thing you can do is being reflexive. Ask yourself the question, how is this hurting me? How is this affecting the way I'm having to live my life? And to recognize that it's not you, it's the system. So not to take it personally, not to feel at the effect of it. And then with other people, mutual support, work your way around it as best you can. And this, for some people, will be a very unsatisfactory answer, but it's like a lot of really thorny questions in life. There's no right answer. There's no right way of doing it. We've just got to feel our way around. But the root of it is understanding how you feel about it, how you're responding, what that is bringing up for you, and how you can look after yourself in that set of circumstances. So, after work, hellish day at work with the bureaucracy, go for a run. Go and knock a squash ball about. Go for a swim. Go and have a beer. Change the scenery. Do a bit of Tai Chi. Whatever floats your boat. Do something to nourish your soul. To give yourself back what's been robbed from your soul through the day. And I think one of the things that seems to come up quite often with particularly folk early on in their careers, who really want to be keen, want to work all the hours God sent, don't look after themselves, don't eat properly, don't exercise, don't socialise. Of course, I'm not looking at anybody in particular with this, you understand. But it does come up, doesn't it? Because if you don't look after yourself, you can't look after everybody else.
Listening to this really makes me think that at the end of the day, it's more about who we are, what our values are, what kind of career development we want, what kind of environment we want. And sometimes it's not really about fighting the system or making the system work differently, but maybe it's also about finding the environment that aligns with more who we are, if it makes sense. So with this being said, how can we understand ourselves? Who are we?
Okay. Yeah. Well, it's called experience of life, and the only way we can find out about ourselves is by going out there and doing stuff in life and having experiences. But it's not just about the experiences; it's about reflecting on those experiences. So that brings us back to this whole idea of reflexive practice and sitting down after the event and thinking, well, so how did that go? What worked? What didn't work? What could I do differently next time to get an even better result? So yes, what I'm reminded of is that the only thing I can really change, truly change, the only thing I can change is me. Can't change you. Can't change anybody else. And often we go through life, and guilty as charged, Your Honour, it's not as though I tumbled out of the womb knowing this stuff. What life has taught me is that, I can't change the things I would want to change out there in the world necessarily. But what I can do is change myself, and I have choices about how I respond to the world. And if I make the right choices about how I respond, actually I feel better. It builds my self-confidence, builds my self-belief. It's about knowing the limitations of what is possible in the circumstances. So knowing yourself is about understanding, first of all, that the only thing you can change is you. And in changing the way you are, other people see you differently, respond differently, and they actually change in turn in response to you. You haven't changed them, they have changed themselves in response to you. So it's about how we set up this chain reaction of change. And it all starts from inside here, understanding my values, my attitudes, my beliefs, what I want in life, what I think my sense of purpose is. So what am I, only 3 questions. This is very simplistic, but there are only 3 questions in life, are there not? Why am I here? What am I supposed to do about it? And what does this mean for me? Who am I in all of that? And you can sort of chunk that right up to, metaphysics and life, the universe and everything, and, the big questions. Or we can bring it right down to, Alex, what's this conversation about? So, Stephen, talking to Alex, why am I here? What am I talking to Alex for? What are Alex and I, what am I supposed to do about that? And what does this mean? How does this fulfill a need in me to do what I believe I should be doing with my life and these few minutes we have together? Understanding my values, attitudes, and beliefs. Values, attitudes, beliefs. Values are to a human being what computer code is to a laptop or an app. The app is what drives the machine, isn't it? So values, attitudes, beliefs are the code that drive how we respond in the world. And if we don't have the right values, attitudes, and beliefs to survive in the environment we're in, it tends to get difficult. So understanding values, attitudes, and beliefs. So when people say, so what are your values? I might say to you, well, actually, I really value honesty, Alex. So you turn around and say, okay, I value all honesty too. And we don't have a further conversation. But there's the danger, because what value you put by that might be very different to mine. So valuing honesty, saying I just value honesty, is not enough. So what does that mean? Does that mean that in all and every circumstance, I've got to be absolutely transparent? Or does it mean actually, when it's reasonable and practicable, or only as far as it helps me get my own way? Where is the limit? So we need to understand what we both mean by openness and honesty. And if we don't have those conversations, which is why we go back to this sort of foundation triangle of good relationship, I've got to understand what you mean by honesty when you tell me that you value honesty or quality or, control or any other value that we subscribe to in business and organizational life. I mean, these things mean so many different things to so many different people. And we just skate over the top. We never interrogate it. So a value like honesty, control, or quality is a value domain. It covers an area of understanding, and we have to explore what is in that area, what it means for both of us in reality, with examples. So, when you say honesty, could you give me an example of when?
Speaking about values as such, is there any resources like websites, tests, or books that you would recommend the audience to read and to dive into the self-exploration journey?
The self-development, self-exploration literature is vast. It's absolutely vast. Places that I have gone in the past, Erich Fromm's Man for Himself, a really profound piece of writing, written way back in if it wasn't the late 40s, it was the early 50s, still holds true today. There are many, many more recent authors of similar insights and similar understanding on the web. Not all of us read, unfortunately, in my view, but not all of us read. So I think what you have to do is search around. What we'll do is put up on the site a list of resources that you might be able to tap into. We have to find our own. And true, yeah, it helps if somebody says, have a look at this first. but you have to do a bit of exploring for yourself as well. What else? I would say that Carl Rogers' work, that also gave me a huge amount of insight. And also, I think reading literature may be an odd way of answering the question. But, the interesting thing about literature is that characters are developed. We place ourselves in the character's shoes, do we not? We ask ourselves the question, what would I do? How would I do? Are they doing something that might work for me in my world in some way or another? So reading good literature as well is another way of reflexively asking questions about how I get on in the world, how I do. But actually, one of the finest ways is through conversation with a good friend, peer, or a coach.
So another point that you mentioned is about reflexive practices. And I remember when we just started the Lancaster University course, it was full of different reflexive practices. Do we want to share with the audience what kind of questions, what kind of models that will be also helpful for the self-exploration journey?
Well, I think that we need to have a whole series of sessions on reflexive practice because it is so important to being able to develop ourselves, both in life generally, but specifically at work. So let's give the audience a very simple cycle to start with, and nothing complicated about this. So you've just come out of a meeting. It's our 3 questions. So all you have to do is say, okay, how did that go? What worked? What went really well? What didn't go quite so well? And then, okay, so given that that's what worked and that's what didn't work so well, what would I do differently next time and how would I do it? That is as good a point of departure as anything. And yes, and we can make it, Gibbs 5-step model, and we can do all sorts of really interesting and sophisticated stuff way down the line. But that's where I started. Yeah, okay, so what worked, what didn't work, what can I do differently next time? Makes a big difference.
You mentioned that that's where you started, and I want to jump onto it. Can you share any, experience or any memory from your career or anything that come to your mind that you can share where this particular reflexive practice really helped to really change the way you approach things in the future?
Yeah, and my initial training was as what we used to call back in the day, a development trainer, and a development trainer would be understood nowadays as a coach. Same methodology, same practices, just different label. And it's quite complex and complicated when you're dealing with somebody else's learning process. And I was constantly sort of losing my way, particularly with groups. And it was one way I had a piece of card, just simply a piece of card that I had in my pocket. And I would get this thing out, 3 questions. Okay, so let's ask the group, what works? Next question, what's not working so well? Before we get to the question of what would they like to do differently, get them to have a conversation. Get people to share their experiences of what worked and what didn't work. Tell their story and listen to the story. And that, as a facilitator, gave me plenty of time and space to work out how to help them to move on to the next stage, which was, okay, so we've heard the stories. What would be a sensible way of moving forward next time something like this happened, which might be in the next half hour with the next exercise? Right, okay, so should we think about doing these things? My next question to them is, as their coach, so how can I support you to do that? How can you support each other to do that? How can you support yourself to do that? So reflexive practice needs to be integrated into what's going on in the moment. It's not something you do, to one side, remotely disconnected. It's part and parcel of what's going on to improve performance. Simple. That we'll certainly come back to reflexive practice because there's an awful lot more to it than that. And it can get really very interesting.
So how can we support people to get through their activities further on? Just to close in on, I think we've shared quite a lot of insights, quite a lot of light bulb moments. Just to summarize, or like one little action that people can do after listening to this video, what would you suggest? What would be your advice to them?
Well, we're all different because I'm one of those people that likes to think about and reflect on what I've heard. So I personally, and this is where we go back to this, treat people the way they would like to be treated, not the way you would like to be. Now, I would like to go away and think about for some time what I'd heard. But other people might say, I want to go out and apply this now. Yeah. And leap in and, just try something that you've heard. See how it works. Other people might want to say to themselves, well, that's really very interesting. I wonder why it works that way. So they want to find out a little bit more. So that goes back to your question, where do we get some more information about this, Stephen? Where do we read up on some of this? So some of us are very action-centered. Some of us are very reflexive and contemplative and thoughtful about our experiences. Other people want to find out more about how things work. Others, yet again, would say, actually, listen to that really good stuff. I'm not going to come back to it until I actually need to use it. Now, very often we're a combination of these two things. So most adults are action-orientated, want to go out and try it in practice, but I'll do it when I actually need it. So how do you manage that when you've just watched a video? Well, just make a note somewhere of an interesting idea that might be useful to try and leave it in your day journal or on your diary page or whatever. Try out whatever it was that you came up with as being interesting in the video and see how it works when you actually need it.
And then I think some people really like learning through talking to other people. So if you're those kind of people, please share about our channel, like, subscribe. We appreciate it. And thank you so much for listening and stay tuned.
Thank you. Bye now.